Hey, it's Michael. If you've been on a Zoom with me lately, you'll notice that you have my full attention. It's because I'm not taking notes. Instead, I rely on Fellow, an AI meeting assistant, to take notes for me, along with tracking action items and decisions, handling recordings, transcripts, and summaries all in one secure platform. It's kind of like magic. Built with security and privacy at its core, Fellow is the only AI meeting assistant that thousands of leaders and organizations trust to capture meeting notes and recordings while keeping your data safe. They're so confident that you'll love it, they're offering an insane deal to you all, Between Two COOs listeners. 90 days of unlimited AI-powered note-taking and recording completely free. Visit fellow.app/COO to sign up today and experience the AI meeting assistant trusted by leaders everywhere.
Everything I learned about failure started with my $250,000 mistake. Everything was going great. We launched the themes marketplace. We got together in San Francisco, so it was the third-party partners, the internal team at Automattic. High fives, handshakes, hugs. And we were flying high. And then we got home, and the glitch. It was a shock. My heart sunk. I was digging in with the team. I didn't know how I was going to come back from this. My Skype lit up. It was the CEO calling, and he typically did text only. No video, no phone calls. So I knew it was serious. I didn't want to hit that button. How was I going to pay for this? I mean, it was multiple times my yearly salary. So I clicked the button.
Hello and welcome back to Between Two COOs. I'm your host, Michael Kading, and today I've got a really special guest who also happens to be a dear friend of mine, Lance Willett, Chief Quality Officer at Automattic, the company behind WordPress and WooCommerce. Lance and I go way back. We're talking nearly 2 decades of friendship, from the early days at Automattic when it was just a small, scrappy team to today's global powerhouse. We'll be diving into how Automattic's open source culture has evolved, what it means to maintain quality at scale, and how AI is reshaping the future of work. Lance is just one of those people who's not only brilliant at what he does, but also has this methodical mind that shaped the way he leads. I'm so excited for this conversation. So let's just get going. Lance, so good to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first, give me the story. Who is Lance Willett? How did you become who you are, and how did you land at Automattic?
Everything started with an independent web developer. I was building websites as a hobby. I know you're a climber, so you'll appreciate. I worked in an outdoor store. So it was a mountaineering climbing store here in Tucson. And I kept trying to get on the web team, but I was working in the mail order, shipping people carabiners when they were about to go up, Half Dome or something. But from there, I left and started my own company. And one of my first clients was the outdoor store. So I got to redesign their commerce site, as a freelancer. Really ran my own agency for 5 years. It was really fun. The pain of being a small business owner, building that empathy. That's how I found WordPress. I was using WordPress as one of the tools that I would deploy. It wasn't only WordPress, but I liked it. I was paying attention to the companies around it. Automattic was on my radar. I always thought about the flexibility. This is years before van life. And at this time, I was living in an RV full time. And I thought about companies that would allow that. Like there's Mozilla, maybe Sun Microsystems with a MySQL team. There weren't that many. And Automattic was a standout there. And so because they made WordPress, I started kind of fanboying the people that worked there on Twitter, meeting them at conferences. And one day they posted a job that was perfect for me. So part of my background is I'm a hybrid designer developer. So I don't really fit into any quite one, like pure design, pure code. And they posted the theme role, which really interested me. And I applied, and it led to a 10-year, decade-long role there.
And like so many people that end up at Automattic, they have a history with WordPress, whether it be in the open source community like yourself, building themes, different plugins. I was building a plugin, and somehow we all landed at Automattic, which was really special in those days because it's built on this open source ethos of we are making web publishing better for everyone and democratizing it so people in countries with oppressive regimes can have their freedom of press. There's that real ethos. Is that still there today?
Absolutely.
17, 20 years later?
In fact, it's more expansive. So our mission is beyond democratizing publishing. Now we talk about democratizing publishing, commerce, and messaging. We have this 3-pillar business model. So yeah, it's expanded, and that global scale is what really attracted me to, beyond just obviously the obvious things around the tools that we love to use and the flexibility. It was also the scale. It's a pretty massive learning curve going from, building one client site to building a theme that can be downloaded by billions or millions of people. But you mentioned the different cultures around the world. One of the biggest lessons for me early on was right to left. I had never encountered that. So Farsi, Arabic, Hebrew. So people would send in bugs and were like, I don't even know how to test this. Can I? There would hopefully someone there's at Automattic who knew that language and can help us. But that meant that mindset shift, right? Where you're just producing something just for your own utility, or maybe for a client, going 10x, 100x to the whole world. So yes, that ethos is still there. Working in the open is still there. A lot of the things that we've talked about over the years. We don't have to broadcast as much the distributed, versus remote conversation. That's the pandemic kind of blew that up. But we do still talk about the economics of open source, right? So I just had a conference with Linux Foundation, and this came up over and over and over. The economic value of open source software is in the trillions now, because it saves so much time that we can compute the value of the replacement cost of that. And Automatic's been a big part of that.
I'm building something right now, and whenever we can, we go, well, let's see if there's an open source library for this that we can just pull. I've always been fascinated with open source and passionate about it. Now, let's talk about Chief Quality Officer. What is that? Is it just a cooler name for COO, or is this something like fundamentally different?
It's absolutely technical operations, so I won't hide that fact. But it is special in the sense that it has a gravity to it. And one of the things I've been noticing is there are other companies that have this. They don't always call it the same thing. Sonos has a quality ombudsman, for example, which I had to look up that word. I didn't know what it meant. Like a guide.
I don't know
or
what
steward.
it means. What does that mean?
Like a steward. Someone who pays attention to what ships, right? Quality control, but fancier. So if you look at it from the technical quality, think of it like 2 C's. So 1 C is the craft, right? Design, code, product management, all the things that go into making software. That's super important. So it's quality as we see it. The other C is context from those we're making it for. Oxygen in from the outside. It could be customers, users. With us, we have internal users, so it doesn't have to be an external customer. It could be an internal employee using it. But if you put those 2 C's together, now you get a feedback loop. And so quality is really looking to make sure that loop is connected, first of all, and then second of all, help it move faster. So I would say it's not just code, though. One of the misperception about my job, I pay attention to everything: copywriting, correct typography, how fast things load, speed, page speed. Think about, I was working with my dentist, helped fix his site when I was in the chair, WordPress site. And what it was he had a video on desktop, beautiful Wi-Fi, everything loaded. As soon as you went on the go with a phone and not on Wi-Fi, it took 20, 30 seconds to load. And it was just one video that needed to be optimized. So that's also quality: speed, security, accessibility, how forms work. And it sounds boring, but think about go to market, lead gen, and you have a intake form. Maybe even for like booking between 2 COOs, if you have too many fields and there's too much friction, that's part of quality. You're going to have, your business is going to grow slower. So, and one last misconception or sort of clarifying thing that's new to me in this go round is the integration piece. So think of the ecosystem. WordPress is a platform. WooCommerce is a platform. Quality to me means integrating really well with all the layers in the tech stack, as well as the players in the ecosystem.
I'm just imagining that a dental appointment, right? Whenever the hygienist is cleaning your teeth and asking you questions, like, you can't really answer, right? Because they have these tools in your mouth. So how are you troubleshooting a WordPress site? And, I kid, of course. How was you talked about forms. How was the between 2 COOs intake form? Was that okay?
Yep, everything worked great. I didn't test keyboard tab index, but no, you're good. But
Wonderful.
Imagine the scale of things, though, right? Imagine like a HubSpot scale, or I'm trying to think of another example, but maybe university would be a good example. But really, any business that wants to book a counselor, a psychologist, someone taking appointments, the more forms you add, and this has been studied with white papers and technical details and data. Obviously, it seems logical. The more steps in your way, the less likely you would complete it. But it's just like a funnel. The more the more steps in the funnel, the less likely you'll get to the end. Just through sheer stuff happens or you get distracted. So Yeah, yours was
Yeah.
fine, but I didn't test it deeply. So if you want me to, I would have to go back.
No, don't. Please don't. Please don't. And don't try writing in Farsi. Um, RTL, I remember that being so difficult and digging into Poe and Mo files, and I'm just thankful that I don't have to do that. So technical operate. Well, first, I just want to highlight for listeners who may not be familiar with it. WordPress powers what is the latest 45% of the top 100 million websites on the internet. Like
Almost half.
this
Yep.
is a massive scale. And WooCommerce, the e-commerce plugin or version, product rather, of Automattic powers what, like a third of e-commerce sites out there. Like we're talking about really massive scale where simple things like forms working, like languages that are right to left instead of left to right, where all of this is really important just in terms of the usability of the internet. So Lance's role as chief quality officer has very broad and significant impact across how people use the web over the entire world. Now, technical operations is really interesting because most of the time when we think COO, we think go to market, we think general administrative. I've led technical operations on more than one occasion. It is very undervalued. Normally, you may find this in the CTO's office, but having someone who's really focused on that quality, how has that changed things at WordPress?
This is a fascinating question because so much of it is cultural. And when I was thinking about the challenges, I'm forming a new team around this as well. So we're forming and have a charter and a 3-year plan on that. So I already mentioned the scale and the scope. That's just, even just the Automattic products. Forget the ecosystem, but just our own things working with each other is a big challenge. I don't know. You remember back in the day, the homepage of automatic.com had the kind of the product list on it. It's hard for us to fit things on there now. I recently did, as part of technical operations, we had to do a bit like inventory management, which GitHub repo is where, things like security updates, all that, who's owning it, testing. And I was surprised there were over 2,000 individual GitHub repos. Number one, that's hard to fit in your head. That's a lot of code to track. But there's also this notion of signal versus noise. So when you're looking at that many things at once, if they're all in the red, it would be impossible to pay attention to. So going back to what I said earlier about the craft versus the context, the inner loop of that, right? The development, let's include design and product and other folks as well, data. But let's just say we're building an interface, a software product. We can get a lot of alerting and it's in our IDE or maybe it's in Cursor now, right? You get some immediate feedback. You're opening it up in a browser. But think about that at scale when you've already launched something. It's already out in the public. How do you track all that? So there's a lot of noise, right? In these, it could be a dashboard, it could be metrics, it could be simple like a Slack alert. And so what I'm finding is I have a lot of audit to do and a lot of cleanup to do just to even figure out where's the signal, what is important, let alone giving that to a team to look at, right? I want to evaluate it first. So there's something here around sense making or map making, a bit like taxonomy of the whole thing to even figure out where to then put pressure on and change the culture. But what you were saying about from like a COO's perspective, it's always about growing the business, right? Cutting costs, improving revenue, more efficient. I think about that as well. But in this case, we're also trying to not just keep up with things, but we want to drive things. You mentioned Automattic's mission and it's kind of its an inception. That I would say what's so interesting about working here, that ambition has grown. And so when I would mention 10, my boss would say 100. And that's still true. And so that goes with technical quality also. I'll give you an example from Woo. The typical Woo store, think one of that comes to mind is Brodo. It's a popular broth subscription service that you can have it shipped to you. Check it out, y'all. Runs on Woo.
D2C broth, huh? Wow. That's a new one.
I love that.
Okay.
Brodo. So the typical Woo store would have something like 45 to 50 plugins, which to me is a lot. My typical blog probably has like 3 or 4, right? Like maybe an SEO thing or a sitemap thing. But it's very complicated because you have things like tax, you have shipping, you have lots and lots more. Well, back to the interoperability. Some of those are built by Automattic. Some are built by like a third-party partner like 10up, a WordPress agency. Some are built by the company themselves. Maybe they have an in-house developer. And so what ends up happening is with the breadth and the depth of that, it's very hard to know when you release a new version of the software, Woo Core, or one of the extensions that Automattic built, how is it going to work with all those other things, including the host, the PHP version, like I said, all the tech stack. And so if you think about it like a quadrant, like, X and Y, on one you have the whole stack, right? Like how is this going to work, anywhere it's put out into the wild. And then on the horizontal is sort of the end-to-end customer experience, the person who visits that site to buy the broth. Checkout needs to be fast, mobile friendly, translatable. So it gets complicated quickly. So to me, one of my responsibilities is once I map and audit all that, then there's a set of benchmarks. So targets, just like you would do with financial, whether it's a forecast or a plan, yearly, quarterly, you do the exact same thing for a whole bunch of product quality metrics or technical efficiency metrics. And something for listeners, if they haven't checked this out, this is pretty common in engineering circles, but I think it's starting to come out further. It's called Core 4. It's from a company called DX. And they have four, the four are efficiency, speed, quality, and impact. And so what you can do is you can start to categorize what those signals are and then have target, like an industry-wide P75, P90, what other tech companies measure in at, and you can start to see, okay, here's where we want to shoot for. So that's part of my job as well, is instrumenting everything, checking in on it, reporting to the board on it.
And this is so interesting because Automattic is the vast majority of people who work there are engineers. And so having smooth engineering operations focused on this core 4, is focused on having quality in check, reducing human error, creating an environment where engineers can do their best work is so critical to a company like Automattic that depends on this for its success. That's why I love this, because we overlook the operations that go into powering 45% of websites on the internet. And with that said, I would like to thank our new sponsor, Brodo. If you like broth, but don't like having to go to the store and want a subscription, check out Brodo. What's their website? Brodo.com, is it? Brodo.com. And Brodo, to whoever works there, you can send your check to, no, I'm just kidding. But we will be in contact over that. Anyways, sorry for the broth divergence. Anyway, we can.
Have you tried that, by the way?
What?
There's this principle from nutrition where if you take the protein first, it kind of evens out your blood sugar for the rest of the meal.
No,
it really works. I haven't been doing Brodo. Yeah. I should start, but I've been just doing from the grocery store, what you can get in a canister. And you just heat up a little mug of it and then start your meal with that. A little bit like a consommé that you would have in like a French restaurant. And then the idea is because your body starts to metabolize that protein first before any other sugars or complex intake, it just evens you out so you don't get a crash after the meal.
And that's brodo.com. Go start your subscription today.
Unpaid sponsorship.
That's fabulous. Perfect. Well, look, we think about quality, and part of quality is accountability. In order to have accountability, you have to have expectations that are aligned. In a company like Automattic, 3,000 people or so, how do you do that at such a scale and ensure that quality?
I love this question. Basically, the presentation I'm doing almost every day to my business partners, whether they're in a business unit or they're an engineering leader or design leaders. It all starts with the rituals. So again, the craft of how we build things. How do we get to fail fast, experiment type loops? And part of that involves, getting things to early beta testers, or how do you get immediate feedback before the ink is dry? That's one of the principles. And so part of my role is making sure that they know how to do QA. I'm putting that in quotes because quality assurance means so many different things to different people. But rather than have a separate step, like a separate QA team, how are you doing that yourself? Open up the browser, refresh, that type of thing. And there's so many modern tools here that we don't have time to cover all of them. But there's one called Storybook, which has all your visual components from your UI. Imagine like a design system with buttons and links and things. You can do automated testing on that to say, every time we change something in our code, does it change our interface? Do our buttons and do our links and do all our fonts and everything work well? So that's an example from the early days. But there's also cultural things, right? There could be tools and processes, but there's also things like When's the last time you talked to a customer? And it sounds dumb, right? It sounds like, of course, right? But we have a habit of yearly customer support rotation. So when you first get hired, you do 2 weeks of customer support. It used to be 3 when you and I joined. And then we do every year you do another week. But beyond that, what's the pressure, right? So I think another part of my role is not just the craft of how we build things, but who's going to use it and what's their feedback. And so an example here is from bug triage. That falls under me as well, building the systems for that. So the principle is the cost to repair goes up significantly as time goes on. And when you're in those early days, you have all your files are open, your browser is open, your IDE is open. It's really cheap and simple to fix something if you're talking to people using it. Later, maybe you've moved on to something else. You've closed that down. But there's also security, legal liability, made commitments to partners. It's out in the wild. It's a lot more expensive. So in early, computer science textbooks, there's this really famous graph that shows this kind of decay of a lot of bugs in the beginning, cheap to fix, and then the cost goes way up post-release. So when I'm talking to teams, when they're asking me about quality or testing, I say, do as much as possible before the ink is dry, and then get really strict on, what you accept and how you're doing that triage to look really quickly for the high impact bugs. So if we have time to talk about it today, one of my new favorite tools is Linear. It's a project and issue tracker. And Linear has very specific built-in opinionated flows on triage, where if something comes in and it automates the priority, it pings the team lead, and they have to fix it with an SLA that you can set up. Like if it's a high priority, within a day. If it's a normal priority, maybe within a week. So there's ways you can shift the culture using the tool, and that hits both the operations, right? How we're going to get this done and how we're going to measure it. And it also goes to, I don't even have to think about it at scale. Because if we have one central tool, then different teams don't have to adopt different principles.
Well, you brought it up. Let's talk about culture shifts, culture change. These things are really difficult. Early days at Automattic, everyone was from open source essentially, and it was very much hey, wouldn't it be cool if? And then we go off and do it. And as we grew and grew, that doesn't necessarily scale. And so there was culture change, and with all culture change, some people embrace it, some people resist it. You get folks who opt out and leave and go on to bigger and better things. How do you do it at scale like this, especially when there's so much technology change? We're talking about using a tool like Linear, using AI. We will definitely talk about AI, but before we get there, how do you think about that now?
It's exactly the role of the operations leader, in my opinion. One of our jobs is to come up with a standard, consistent set of tools across all of Automattic. Case in point, GitHub for code, Figma for design, and Linear for project and issue tracking. We just decided we're picking that, master that, maximize that. So that's one thing, is you can have a top-down approach where you say, this is the best in class. Think of when Slack took over IRC. There was a team at Automattic, I think it was the design team, using HipChat at the time. It was a lot more visual, a lot more interactive. They were really enjoying it. Eventually, we ended up using Slack, and that's the de facto now. So it's not just because we like the tool, it's because it improves execution, right? One place to learn. So going to AI real quick, if we're going to build an MCP integration, or we're going to build some AI, I don't want to do that in 3 different places: Trello, Asana, GitHub. I want to just do that in Linear. And by the way, we're a close partner to them. Maybe they can even build it. We don't have to. So one place to add AI assistance, that's one principle. It also increases visibility. So single source of truth. I say this every day so many times that my dictation app, I use this app Whisperflow for dictating, AI-powered tool, and it has started adding that to my dictionary. It's kind of like text expander of where you would type the same thing a lot and it would suggest a snippet to you for support agents and stuff. So single source of truth, what does that do? Now, if I'm a new teammate and I need to onboard, I just go there. If I'm a manager and I need to check in on things, I go to those insights, one place to look at the data. Next, we have corralling costs. I don't have to negotiate 3 different vendors. So one thing that happened in Automattic's history, we used to really lean on the autonomy. Do your own thing. It's okay. Well, I've noticed in the shift as I've matured, but also the company has matured, is we do less of that. We do some of that in terms of flexibility of time, how you build things, but in terms of tools, we've really tried to be more consistent. So at scale, across that many employees, that negotiation with that vendor, if we go to one vendor, we'll have more negotiating power. Another one is very, very, very important to me is, how do I set and teach a higher standard? So how do I speed up? If I'm trying to build a culture and maximize the use of this tool, I want that to be front and center for everyone. So if I go into an all hands or a town hall, I want that just to be one kind of easy, memorable thing, like this one shortcut or this one tool or watch this one video. So it speeds up how we spread knowledge and skills. And lastly, I think that something with the tool and the way it supports an opinionated workflow, it actually speeds up shipping. And I don't know exactly how to explain this, but one of our principles has always been learn in public, ship faster. And rather than wrangling a tool and becoming like an expert in that thing, let's become an expert in shipping code. So if we can maximize and learn the tool really well, then that all goes away. And now we're operating the way we want to operate.
Well, this is interesting. Now we're talking about shipping code faster, but effectively. And here's where we get into AI, right? There's this paradox, essentially. AI lets you ship faster and scale, but it also introduces tons of noise and unpredictability. How do you balance that?
The most important thing to me with all these AI use cases is what problem are you solving? It's back to basic product management or even entrepreneurship, right? The most basic business principle. Who's your customer? What's their pain point? And how does your solution do it well enough for them that they're willing to pay you? Exact same principle for all these things. And I've been thinking about this a lot because with testing and QA and quality, there's a lot of opportunity. Speaking of the scope and the scale and all these things, to just deploy an agent, right? Or unleash some intelligence on it. But what if we don't even know the workflow? What if we're not even sure what the pain points are, right? So it all goes back to you need to know your customer. You need to know those loops, whether it's an inner loop and outer loop. What's the feedback? How are you going to know if it's going well? Is it checking in? Are there metrics? Are there dashboards? Can you pause it, right? So I feel like the design and the judgment and the foresight is so critical before even thinking about, is it automation? Is it AI, Gen AI versus off-the-shelf tool that has that or maybe not? And beyond, I think the design, then you get into probably some of the governance and things like data. How do I know where this is going to be shared? What model, that kind of thing. That's just diligence, basic stuff you would do with any vendor. But it's moving so fast that I think it's easy to get fast and loose with that. And so one principle I picked up, and I think our team, we have an internal AI team, has really been pushing this, doing a good job pushing this internally. If it's under a certain threshold, like you're doing a quick experiment, just go ahead, right? $20, show us what you did, kind of execute out loud a little bit, show and tell. If you're going to do something that's a bit like then you go out to customers, you're going to start working on data that's, maybe has some personal information. That's where you want to then lean on the team. That's where you want to have a little bit more of a decision-making conversation.
And that's so critical, is setting up those guardrails and the guidelines on here's how you can use AI in a safe way, and make sure you follow this. We're all about experimentation. Go ahead, expense that $20, show us what you can do, but there has to be a very firm understanding of what is and is not permissible to include in that. How has that scaled? Because to me, that is so difficult.
It's still early days, but I'll share an example of what I've been putting in my workflow. I can't speak for other folks at Automattic, but I have seen a lot of experimentation. We were doing a bit like a hack week here and there, build something today and share. It's really exciting and really fun. But one thing I'm doing, let's say I have a spreadsheet. So I've got my Google Sheets open. I've got a bunch of columns, and maybe one of them maybe it's recruiting. Let's just pick that. So I've got some names, some LinkedIn. So it's personal. It's got the person's email maybe or something like that. Some of it's public, some of it's not. I'm not just going to paste that into ChatGPT or Gemini necessarily. But one thing I learned recently was because we're a paid Google Workspace account, there's a different data agreement that it will not be used to train the model. I have to research that, verify it, check with legal, etc. With ChatGPT, if I just open up or Perplexity or some other vendor, which is great user experience, but I have not done the diligence to see what their data agreements are, and it's not part of our paid workspace, that's where I get like a mental step to say, let me check that first. So what I've been doing is I've just been using Gemini more often within my Automattic workspace as my default first stop, because I know it has that data protection behind it, or they aren't going to share that data.
We're talking about risk management here, but how do you disseminate those practices for risk management?
One of our principles, you might remember the open communication. We have this blogging tool called P2. We have Slack. We don't use email too much. And one of the things about that open communication is if you share it with one party, everyone else sees it. So you can disseminate a bit by osmosis or by rubbing shoulders. But there's also this idea of repetition. And this is probably a typical executive leadership thing, right? Say it 10 different times. For me, what has come up for me is I make a slide deck I make a P2 post. I make a Slack update. I mention it in every meeting. Then we write it down. So we have a field guide, which is like our wiki. And that field guide has a one-stop shop. So AI, tool use for everyone. You kind of bookmark that, pin that to the top of the field guide. So when someone lands there, they see that. And then beyond that, all the typical things like a team lead or a manager would, hey, help us spread the word on this. New employees, tell them immediately. What I've noticed also with tools, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Maybe Linear has this, but maybe you have a good example. When you have something that is sort of a preamble, like you're typing into it and has that little help text or the tooltip, you could also program it in there, a bit like a heads-up display of like, are you sure? And before you click enter, and it can kind of have like a little help section. That's something I've done a bit in my coding for internal tools. I'll have like a little, reminder with hopefully not blocking them, but just kind of like, before you post this, are you sure you want to post this? And that's another way you can link out to documentation and things.
And there's a business idea here, by the way, folks. Anyone wants to go and solve this challenge, you can probably use AI to prevent people from putting bad things in AI. So there you go. If someone wants to go out and start that business, you can send the check to... No, I'm kidding again. Oh, man. Well, AI is so cool these days. Obviously, it's going to be with us for a long time. It's changing how we do work. It's changing how we think about the scope of the world. What's the best real world use case of AI at Automattic right now?
Probably our chat support experience. We have a home built bot that is deflecting support and really shifting. There's two parts to it. There's the conversational UI, right? When you're trying to get to support. There's also surfacing the right context at the right time. That's been a big push for us across all our products. And I've experienced it as a consumer myself. Before I returned to Automattic, I was building websites again, and I had to contact WordPress.com support. And it was a bit in the rough stage. And, 6 months ago, it's really improved since then. We've put a lot into it. And the idea here is well-trained happiness engineers, is what we call our support line reps, our frontline support. They can then spend time on education, upselling, getting engaged with customers on a Zoom call, rather than here's the docs for the DNS for your domain, right? Which would be obvious in the interface if the app is built right. So some of the trends I'm seeing are we can then categorize some of those interactions and start to improve everything, product, support, documentation, tooling, just from the data, right? Even without humans in the loop. That's been a beautiful feedback loop. And then another thing I think is, what are some ways we can introduce new UI, so new interactions that don't exist right now? One of our recent acquisitions is WPAI, James LePage and team. He spoke at WordCamp US last year, and I was really excited by his talk. Then he joined the company. And one of the things he showed in that WordCamp talk was, rather than trying to figure out where the menu is for that one plugin, for that one thing you need to do, which you can never remember, you just talk to it, conversational, natural language. I need to update my tagline, right? It takes you to that page. So that's another thing. And then the third thing I would share, super proud of this for the team that's been working on it, is our AI website builder. Perennial pain point with WordPress is themes and customization. How do I get it to look like the demo? How do I get that font that I saw the other day? And how do I get it, the sidebar? It's just so complicated. And if you don't know CSS or HTML or even WordPress, so we've built a AI site builder that's really, I would say, it leaps ahead of what has been seen before. And we really hope we can bring this to the rest of the ecosystem eventually.
And pretty soon you won't have to navigate away from that chat to update your site's tagline. It'll just do it for you. Yeah, that's coming tomorrow.
I think that's a good idea in the sense of things that are deterministic. But the assistant would also be there for the kind of the creative stuff. And that's what I was going toward with the happiness engineer conversation. At our best, if we're in support, we're enabling the person to grow their business or get their goal, grow an audience. We have bloggers too who build newsletter subscriptions and things. Well, I'd rather spend time with them talking about how do you grow an audience and what should your headline testing strategy be versus where's the headline again? And do I need to do an H3 versus an H4 with my theme? It gets kind of ticky-tacky. And so I think with a conversational AI, whether it's the tactical stuff, like this one-time chore I never have to do ever again, I'm not going to memorize this, just do it for me. Like SSL certificates or something super tactical. Those, by the way, those are still really annoying and really painful for a lot of consumers. On the other side of that is sort of the more generative, right? And that's where you can get into, I've got an idea, but I don't know how to do this with this tool. And I think that's where the opportunity is for growth.
So early days of WordPress, a ton of excitement. There are people probably don't even remember these. Some of the incumbents were movable type and typepad, both from 6apart, which I don't even think exists anymore. There was Microsoft Live Journal.
Text pattern.
Yeah. And WordPress came along and just put them all out of business. WordPress has been around now, how many years? 20, 25?
22
Long
years.
time. Yeah. And when we're talking about 45% of the internet, the slightest little change is quite consequential. And there's that saying, big ships are hard to turn. There are all of these upstarts. Webflow, I recently had Linda Tong, the CEO of Webflow, on. There's Wix and Squarespace. How do you keep pace? How do you keep pace with the innovation that they're putting out while still maintaining the internet that people can still go to 45% of those websites?
I love this challenge, and it's why a lot of people are still sticking with this thing. Because you get to a certain, like an S curve, where you've kind of solved the first challenge, and then there's another one right behind it. You're hiking, and there's another mountain range right behind it. So it's really endless ambition, endless challenge. I don't know if you've used either of those tools, but Canva particularly really democratizes design. It's just, you can almost speak into it, and it has templates in it.
My 11-year-old is a Canva power user, along with it was Dali and then
ImageGen.
Sora and ImageGen. And I have a pro account for Canva for myself, but if I go in and I look, it's just, I have to scroll very hard to find my projects because it is dominated with the incredible creativity of my 11-year-old, which I think speaks to the beauty of the software and the product. But
how do we harness that same power? And I love the idea of a younger person because they're not bound by the same constraints you and I would think of. The sidebar should be on the left. They don't care about that. It's I didn't want it this way. Minecraft, another example of this, right? Build whatever you want. So I think the future and how we push goes back to what problem are we solving, which is I want it to look like my vision that's inside my head without getting in my way. That's any creative task.
While maintaining that innovative edge, which it's true, the upstarts will be able to move faster. There's no question about it. But it really comes down to the businesses and how do we react? How do we respond? How do we ensure quality is there? Taking off the engineer hat, putting the business hat on. Back in my day at oh man, gosh, I sound like an old guy. In my day, we used to type full blog posts ourselves. Anyways, back in my day at Automattic, it was very supportive of building products that were completely free and would always be free, right? Because it enhanced the WordPress ecosystem. But now there's hundreds of millions of dollars of venture capital investment that has gone into Automattic. The last was at a $7.5 billion valuation. And I imagine more pressure to generate revenue. Is that the case? And how do you balance that beautiful thing of putting out things that just contribute to the overall ecosystem versus the very real need to generate revenue and show a return to those investors who have put so much money in?
Some of it happens organically. I think that one of our many, many, many years now motto or sort of part of our creed is we're helping build a sustainable livelihood for folks, whether they're in the ecosystem or outside of it, right? They can get a job in a WordPress related ecosystem company or they're building a business on this thing. So that, just like any other, for-profit company, that's a flywheel of if you help other people grow, that's a high willingness to pay, right? So they'll renew at a good pace. So I think some of it's organic. You already mentioned innovation and pushing. That's another piece where you got to really cross innovator's dilemma. How do we disrupt ourselves? And that goes to the page building that I mentioned and kind of the new, how people are interacting with digital apps in general. How is WordPress in that space? But my brain starts to go a little bit toward, on the quality side, there's a gravity that attracts customers organically when you have high quality, such that the loyalty and the expansion happen without a lot of marketing and sales dollars. That's a unique kind of quirk of Automattic is we haven't always been a marketing powerhouse. In fact, you could argue that's not our strength. We were an engineering-led shop. What comes to mind for me is this quote from Casey Winters, a skilled operator that might be a good candidate for this podcast. He talks about while fixing small bugs might not 10x your growth overnight, not fixing them make 10x growth impossible over time. So the system thinking around that, right? The first principle is of what's the long-term compounding effect? What do we do today, which will then bring us to that billion-dollar valuation or the next phase of that? So we have to continually think about the quality of our product, how that lends itself to renewals and expansion, the innovation, making sure that we're meeting people's needs, and then the other side is the team, the culture. So those two things are essential to that long-term growth.
There's another interesting thing to talk about here. Automattic acquired Tumblr for next to nothing, especially when compared to the $1 billion price tag that Yahoo paid for it. You became the CTO of Tumblr. And as I understand it, you, along with the rest of the team, largely stabilized a company that I imagine was bleeding cash, probably bleeding talent and users. Take me through that.
It's quite a journey. It's still going. Tumblr is still alive and kicking. I would say, you mentioned this already, but the cost-cutting effort, that's anytime you bring something in. That's not special to this case. But Tumblr was a really popular web originally, and it kind of morphed into Android and iOS, like a heavy-duty mobile. And it also shifted from text and maybe some images to much more video. So the cost to host it was a lot more than I think a lot of folks knew about. Just the sheer cost of the servers, and video is more expensive than image. But how you compress that, how you serve that. To me, the other piece of it was it just brought a lot of things we didn't have at robust scale within Automattic, which was all built around community and topics and tags. So really kind of shifted our culture for a positive there. But for me personally, it was definitely a masterclass in change management and operations. I mean, probably my first tab every morning was, what are the server costs with AWS? What's the staffing you mentioned, the best folks? That was a big lesson, actually. On a base of like 200 or 300 people, we turned over probably 175, 200, like quite a few in the first year, 18 months. So how do you find ways to engage the best people, bring them into key roles in the parent company, make them all-stars and make them rock stars in what they're good at, their strengths? How do you get to a fast no with those that aren't going to stick around very long? That was difficult for me because I think there's so much work to do. You don't necessarily want people to leave to somewhere else, but you kind of knew that they weren't going to stay. So it was a tough conversation. But I would say it really boosted us in some ways. And then in other ways, it stretched us. So it stretched us on infrastructure. It stretched us on, I mentioned recommendations and data. And then the piece that's harder to talk about because it's just not my expertise, but there's the safety aspect as well. This is an app that's really popular with younger folks, 15 to 25 typically, Gen Z or younger. And there's laws around things there, like what age people can join the platform. You have kids that age, so I'm sure you know all this. And then it's the web, it's the internet, right? So there's people posting stuff that you don't want those kids to see. And so that aspect is just very challenging. Meta, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, do this at scale. But for us as a smaller company, it continues to be a challenge. And I think that was something that I underestimated personally. And it's still something we're learning how to do well.
You said it was a masterclass in change management. What's the biggest lesson? What would you do differently?
This is out of my control, but I would have met in person. It was the pandemic. The team was in Manhattan, mostly in New York City. I was in Arizona. I never got to meet anyone. Zero. Yeah. So it was all mediated by video. Typically, one of our strengths is we do meetups. So we travel in between and see each other frequently. I had zero time with the Tumblr team. So if I could do it all over again, I would, make my way and shake people's hand, give them a hug, boost them up with the more human side of things. That's one of my strengths. I just didn't get to do that. And I regret that.
Well, not something you can really regret, right? The world shuts down. You don't necessarily get to hop on a plane into Manhattan and shake hands and give hugs. So give yourself a little bit of a break there. Looking at Automattic, looking at the pace of iteration, looking at just how the tech world is changing, what do you think the biggest business challenge that Automattic faces over the next 10 years is?
Probably our long-term challenge is our optimism. I would call it bounded optimism, but it's our ambition to be really stretch and grow. And so one of the maturity cycles that we're in now is not taking on too much. And I'm seeing this from the quality side because I have to track everything. It's a lot of stuff, right? And so what's our appetite? And how do we do sort of a portfolio review of that from a business ownership standpoint to say, maybe think of like a high performing quadrant and a lower performing quadrant and not have it be an emotional or gut decision. And I think a lot of this is my personal tendency. I think why I really thrive in this culture. A lot of what we do is in that vein. Like we see a new opportunity, we go for it, and we're fast. But you have to weigh it against everything else, all the other opportunities. So I think that's one of our biggest challenges is what are we doing? How does it fit in with what we're doing now? How does it integrate? How does it create a sum that's better of its parts? Good example is our latest acquisition, Clay.earth, personal CRM. It's part of that messaging pillar that I mentioned. How do you, when you're speaking to someone, have all the information about them that you need if you're booking a meeting or things like that? Really great tool. But that could be a distraction from something else, right? So how do we put it in its place? How do we make sure that we give it the right amount of investment, but not too much or too little? I think that's one of the biggest things.
Lance, you've worked with Matt Mullenweg, the founder of Automattic and WordPress, for such a long time, so very closely. He is such a brilliant founder and such a brilliant businessman and investor. What's the most impactful thing that you've learned from him?
It's hard to pick. You had asked me this a couple of years ago and I had 10, so I got to pick one. Let me pick the one around. I'll pick the one that's harder for me at times. Other times it's simple, but the principle is details matter. So look your best. Look at interface. And the way this comes up is, let's say you're going to put out a press release or you're going to put out a public blog post about something. Double and triple check it. Is the screenshot to the right screen? Is it, on a Mac, is it going to be blurry? And Matt has a reputation for being very picky about those things. But I love the principle behind it, which is first impressions matter. Think about onboarding to an app, right? So the first run experience, this comes to play, how the logo looks, how the page navigate, the form fields, which we talked about today, the usability. So this isn't just aesthetics or visuals, it's also how the thing works. So Matt has drilled into us, and I've taken this to heart of pay a little bit extra attention to how the human interface works and not just the technical details. It needs to load fast as well. But if you look your best and the details are in place, then you have a chance to have that conversation. Now you have a chance to open up the conversation for someone to become a customer, take their money, rather than something that's a bit more sloppy or a bit not your best work. And there's been so many times where in my role, it's been a bit of like a Matt whispering role where folks that are around me, it could be a third party coming into a negotiation, it could be a teammate within the company. I'll mention this and they'll say, oh, it's okay. It's good enough. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that that's true, right? I think that it is something that we need to pay attention to. And so it's really impacted me, even what we're doing right now, right? The setup, the lighting, technology, a fast computer, right? Investing in my home network, all these things come to play. And there's so many aspects to this. But the principle remains, which is if you want an opportunity to be in the market, if you want to be an opportunity to be a leader, if you want the opportunity to be an operator, put your best foot forward. Make it your best shot. And I think that's really stuck with me to this day.
Love it. Okay, it's time for my last and favorite question. We've all had those moments where we've been in the seat and something completely off the wall happens and we thought, I never thought I'd see that. Do you have one you can share with us?
Everything I learned about failure started with my $250,000 mistake. Everything was going great. We launched the themes marketplace. We got together in San Francisco. So it was the third-party partners, the internal team at Automattic, high fives, handshakes, hugs. And we were flying high. So partners were happy because they had a new revenue stream. We were happy, the platform. And then the customers were really happy because now they had new options for their, we talked about this today, customization, new themes, new colors, new fonts. And then we got home and the glitch, it was a shock. So we had a simple arithmetic error that meant for the first 6 months of this marketplace, instead of the even split, sending out 50% of revenue to the partners, we'd been sending 100%. My heart sunk. I was digging in with the team. I didn't know how I was going to come back from this. My Skype lit up. And this is in the days when it was the CEO calling. And he typically did text only. No video, no phone calls. So I knew it was serious. I didn't want to hit that button. How was I going to pay for this? I mean, it was multiple times my yearly salary. So I click the button. Matt gets on. He's calm. He says, Lance, I'm glad we found it. I'm glad we understand it. I'm glad we're going to fix it. Now I need you to go do the hard work of talking to the providers to break the news to them. So I was relieved. We learned, we understood it. We're going to move on. But what I took away from this crisis was 2 leadership lessons that have stuck with me. One is money isn't everything. Number 2, our mistakes don't define us. And I've taken that appreciation to the teams I've led to have the space to make mistakes while working together in an atmosphere built on trust.
And what's one mistake you will never make again? Just that.
Check the math.
Lance, thanks so much for joining me. It's been a really special treat for me. Where can people go to keep up with you?
Fullstackleader.blog. That's my work blog. So I have productivity, WordPress stuff, work quality, if people are interested in more on that. I also have lance.blog. That's more my personal side. Photos, poems, a few stories. And that's a bit more like my on the go. If I'm traveling, I'll try to put something up there.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it. And thank you very much, Lance. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening to Between Two COOs. I'm your host, Michael Koenig, and a very special thank you to Lance Willett for joining us. Tune in next time for our next COO chat on Between Two COOs. And be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Just visit betweentwocoos.com for more. And if you have a minute, please leave us a review so other folks can get great advice from phenomenal COOs, or in this case, Chief Quality Officers, CQOs. I'm not sure there's any others out there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Tune in next time, and until then, so long. Hey, it's Michael. If you've been on a Zoom with me lately, you'll notice that you have my full attention. It's because I'm not taking notes. Instead, I rely on Fellow, an AI meeting assistant, to take notes for me, along with tracking action items and decisions, handling recordings, transcripts, and summaries, all in one secure platform. It's kind of like magic. Built with security and privacy at its core, Fellow is the only AI meeting assistant that thousands of leaders and organizations trust to capture meeting notes and recordings while keeping your data safe. They're so confident that you'll love it, they're offering an insane deal to you all, Between Two COOs listeners. 90 days of unlimited AI-powered note-taking and recording completely free. Visit fellow.app/COO to sign up today and experience the AI meeting assistant trusted by leaders everywhere.